The hum of the airport echoed as John, the janitor, mopped the floor, his eyes tired but focused on his work. He had seen countless travelers, all rushing in and out, but none had ever caught his attention like she did. She stumbled through the door, an heiress, clearly intoxicated, her heels clicking erratically against the smooth tiles. A bottle of champagne loosely clutched in her hand. Her expensive clothes, tailored dress, designer sunglasses, screamed privilege, but her wavering posture showed that something was wrong. John sighed a bit reluctant. Should I step in? Or let her fall on her own, he wondered. But his conscience stirred. He approached her slowly. Miss, are you all right? She blinked, her glossy eyes meeting his. You're not one of them, are you? She slurred, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. John hesitated, but she was falling, her body tilting like a toppled statue. He caught her just before she hit the floor, his grip firm yet gentle. Easy there, John said, guiding her to the nearest bench. She barely registered his words, her mind far from the present. Thank you, she murmured, her voice weak. She adjusted herself on the bench, staring at the empty space in front of her as though looking for something or someone. John watched her in silence, unsure how to proceed. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but she ignored it. The message's preview was clear enough to make his stomach churn. Where the hell are you? Get here now. John looked away, uncomfortable. John felt an unfamiliar weight in the air between them. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't a therapist, wasn't paid to get involved in people's messes. Yet here he was, sitting beside a rich, beautiful woman who, from the look of things, had no place being here. He couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Are you sure you're okay? He asked, his voice rough with concern. I'll call someone for you. A cab or a friend? She stared at him as though she were seeing him for the first time, her lips trembling. No one cares about me, John, she whispered. They only want something. I just want. She trailed off, her eyes closing. Pow. I just want to be left alone. Her body slumped further into the bench, and John realized that whatever had broken her, it wasn't something he could fix. But he still stayed, watching her quietly. John felt an unfamiliar weight in the air between them. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't a therapist, wasn't paid to get involved in people's messes. Yet here he was, sitting beside a rich, beautiful woman who, from the look of things, had no place being here. He couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Are you sure you're okay? He asked, his voice rough with concern. I'll call someone for you. A cab or a friend. She stared at him as though she were seeing him for the first time, her lips trembling. No one cares about me, John, she whispered. They only want something. I just want. She trailed off, her eyes closing. I just want to be left alone. Her body slumped further into the bench, and John realized that whatever had broken her, it wasn't something he could fix. But he still stayed, watching her quietly. Her pain was too raw, too deep, for simple answers. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. She sat, still as stone, while John stood by helplessly, not knowing what to do. Eventually, she turned to him, her face pale, but her gaze sharp. Why are you still here? She asked, her voice almost accusatory. John shifted uncomfortably but answered honestly. I'm just doing my job. She chuckled bitterly, but her lips quivered as though she might cry at any moment. Your job, she repeated, almost to herself. You clean up the mess, like you're cleaning up mine right now. John didn't respond. He knew better than to say something that wouldn't matter. She sighed deeply. You're right, she whispered. I can't keep running away. For a moment she met his eyes, searching, like she was trying to tell him something she couldn't say out loud. John sat in silence beside her, watching as she gazed out at the terminal. The hum of the airport was distant, muffled almost, as if they were in their own little world. He could sense her unease but didn't press her. The minutes dragged on, an oppressive quiet filling the space between them. Finally, she turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said, Her eyes darkened with a mix of anger and sadness. "You wouldn't understand." John glanced at her, unsure what to say. She was still holding on to the phone, but now she clenched it tightly, her knuckles white. "I have everything," she continued, almost to herself. "Money, power, influence. And still it feels like I have nothing. Like I'm just a puppet for them." Her eyes met his, searching. "Don't you ever feel like you're more than what they make you out to be?" she asked, her voice shaky. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He didn't have the answers she was looking for, but he understood what it felt like to be trapped. "I don't have much," he said softly, "but I know that sometimes people want things they can't have. Or maybe they don't know what they really want." The woman turned toward him, her lips parted as though she were about to speak, but then stopped. Instead, she just looked at him for a long moment, her gaze softening. "You're not like them," she said, almost surprised. "You don't see me the way they do." John didn't respond, but the truth of her words lingered in the air. Her walls, once so tightly built, were starting to crack, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something real in her eyes. She wasn't just a privileged woman with a perfect life. She was a person with burdens, just like anyone else. The woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on her phone. She glanced at him again, as if deciding whether to say more. "I've been running from something for a long time," she said quietly. "I think I've been running from myself." Her voice wavered slightly. "I was supposed to be something, someone great. And now, you." Her words trailed off as she looked down at her hands, the champagne bottle now forgotten on the floor beside her. "Now I don't even know who I am anymore." She sighed deeply, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her emotions. John watched her, his expression softening. For the first time, he wasn't just seeing the heiress. He was seeing a person, someone who had been broken down by expectations, pressures, and isolation. "It's not too late," he said quietly. "You're still here, and you can choose who you want to be. It's never too late to change." The silence stretched for several long moments before the woman spoke again. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've been living for other people for so long. I don't even know how to live for myself anymore." John looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said, trying to offer comfort. "It's one step at a time, and you don't have to do it alone." She glanced at him, surprised by his kindness. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe hope, maybe uncertainty. "I don't deserve kindness like this," she whispered, shaking her head. John sighed. "You deserve it just like anyone else." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she seemed unsure of how to process his words. But the hesitation was there, like a crack in the dam, a place where something real could break through. The woman sighed deeply, her eyes closing for a moment. "Maybe I am tired of living for everyone else," she murmured, almost to herself. "Maybe I just need to figure out who I am." John nodded slowly, unsure of what else to say. "Maybe that's all we need to do," he said softly. "Find ourselves again." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and for the first time since they had met, a genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Thank you, John," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me more than anyone else could." He looked at her, unsure of how to respond, but his heart felt lighter. Maybe, just maybe, this small moment of kindness could be the first step for her, and for him, too. The air between them had shifted, but it was still heavy with unspoken truths. The woman, now sitting up straighter, her posture less defeated, stared ahead, lost in thought. "I never wanted this life," she said quietly, almost as if confessing. "It was all handed to me, the name, the fortune, the expectations." Her hands gripped her purse tightly, as though it were something she could control when everything else felt uncontrollable. "It never felt like my life," she continued, her voice shaky. I thought I could escape, but now it feels like I'm trapped in my own skin, trapped in a life that's not mine to live." John watched her, his expression somber. He could see it now, the cracks in her armor. She wasn't just the spoiled heiress, she was someone who had never been allowed to choose her own path. "You've been running for so long, haven't you?" he asked gently, his voice filled with understanding. The woman shook her head slightly, as if trying to push the thoughts away. "I've always had to live for everyone else," she murmured, almost to herself. "My father, he wanted me to be perfect. My mother, she never really cared. It was always about the image, the family name, the money." She stopped speaking, her chest rising and falling with a deep breath, as though struggling to keep her composure. "And me? I was just the puppet. No matter how hard I tried to please them, it was never enough." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, and she wiped a tear that had started to form in the corner of her eye. John looked at her, understanding but unable to find the right words to ease her pain. "It's not too late to take back control," he said quietly, his voice firm yet gentle. "You can choose now. No one can take that from you." A long silence passed between them, and in it, something shifted. She looked at John, and for the first time, there was a faint trace of a smile on her face, tired but genuine. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. "I don't know what it means to be me. Outside of all of this." Her hand reached up, pushing her messy hair back behind her ear. "I've been so focused on being what everyone else wanted me to be, maybe I've forgotten how to just be." John nodded thoughtfully, his voice quiet but sincere. "It's okay to not have all the answers," he said. "We're all still figuring it out, even when we think we should have it all together." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time she wasn't just an heiress, a symbol of wealth and status. She was someone searching for herself, and for a brief moment, she felt like she wasn't alone. The conversation slowed, and the woman let out a sigh. Her hands now rested comfortably on her lap, no longer clenched. "I've been so afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of being seen for who I really am, not who they wanted me to be." She met his gaze, and there was something in her eyes, something she had kept hidden for so long. "It's easier to hide behind the perfect image, behind the name. But now, she trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. "Now I don't know how to break free. I've built a life that doesn't fit me and I don't know where to start." John looked at her with quiet understanding, his expression solemn yet reassuring. "It starts with you," he said softly. "Choosing what's right for you, not for them, not for anyone else." She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floor. The weight of her words hung in the air, but there was something different now. A change had occurred, small but significant. She raised her head slowly, and met John's eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and newfound strength. "You've made me see things differently. Maybe I've been giving away my power for far too long." She stood up, adjusting her dress and taking a deep breath. "I think it's time to take it back." John stood too, watching her with a quiet pride. "It's your choice," he said simply. "Whatever you decide, you've got the power to make it happen." She smiled, the first real smile he had seen on her face. It was small, but it was real. "I think I'm finally ready to start living for myself," she said, a new light in her eyes. The days that followed were a mix of clarity and confusion. The woman, whose name John learned was Evelyn, seemed to be wrestling with something inside her. Her movements had become less hurried, and there was a sense of purpose in her actions, but the weight of her past still clung to her. One afternoon, as they sat in the same terminal, Evelyn turned to John, her face a mask of determination. "I'm trying," she said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "I'm trying to figure out what it means to be me, but I feel like I'm stuck, like every step I take is only pulling me further into the mess I've made." She ran a hand through her hair, her expression strained. "How do you move forward when everything behind you is so broken?" John sat quietly, knowing words could only go so far. "You move forward because you have to," he said. "Not because it's easy, but because you can't let your past define you." Evelyn let out a deep breath, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I thought I had everything figured out," she said, her voice tight. I thought I could escape, that I could find something real. But it's like the harder I try to break free, the more I'm pulled back into that world. The world that made me who I am, for better or worse. She paused, her eyes flicking to the terminal's glossy floor, as if searching for answers in its reflection. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore. John's eyes softened. He understood. You don't have to know it all right now, he said, his tone gentle but firm. You just have to start by asking yourself what you want, not what they want from you. Evelyn shook her head, her lips trembling. But what if I don't know how to want anything for myself? John leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. Sometimes it's not about knowing exactly what you want, he said, his voice low. Sometimes it's about giving yourself the space to figure it out. It's okay to not have all the answers. Evelyn turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. You make it sound so easy, she replied, her tone soft but laced with sarcasm. It's not easy, John admitted. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, but it's worth it. Evelyn's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, and then, for the first time, she smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. I never thought I'd hear something like that from someone like you, she said quietly. John chuckled, though it was a soft sound. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, he replied. We all have our own messes. The words lingered between them, a quiet truth that neither of them had expected to hear. As the conversation continued, Evelyn seemed to calm, but there was a stillness in her eyes, a quiet storm that hadn't yet passed. She was beginning to see that her past, her family, and her image didn't have to be the things that defined her future, but the weight of it all still held her down. It's like I'm stuck in a loop, she said, her voice small. Every time I try to step forward, I feel like I'm being dragged back. I don't know how to break free from them. She glanced over at John, her eyes searching for something, anything. How do you break free from a life you didn't even choose? John looked at her, his expression solemn but understanding. You start by acknowledging it, he said. By admitting that it's okay to not have everything figured out, that it's okay to be lost. The first step is giving yourself permission to be uncertain. Evelyn stood up suddenly, her hands brushing off the fabric of her dress as she straightened. I don't know what comes next, she said, her voice clearer now, filled with purpose. But I think I'm ready to find out. I think I'm finally ready to stop running. John stood up too, his expression softening into a proud smile. That's all anyone can do, he said, his voice steady. Take one step at a time. Whatever happens, you've already started. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes no longer filled with doubt, but with the first flicker of self-assurance she'd shown. I never thought I'd get to this point, she said quietly, almost to herself. But maybe that's the point. You don't have to have it all figured out. John nodded in agreement. Sometimes, just starting is enough. She smiled again, this time a little brighter. Thank you, John, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Evelyn had begun to find a rhythm in her life, one she had never experienced before. The uncertainty that once paralyzed her now seemed like a space for potential, not a burden. Yet, no matter how far she tried to run from her past, it was always there, lurking in the background. One evening, as they sat across from each other at a small cafe just outside the airport, Evelyn looked at John with a deep sigh. I thought I was ready to leave it all behind, she admitted, her voice soft but heavy with regret. But sometimes I think it's still controlling me. I keep hearing their voices, seeing their faces. They're everywhere, even when I'm trying to start fresh. John met her gaze with an understanding that went beyond words. The past doesn't just vanish, he said quietly. But it doesn't have to define you. You've started something real. Don't let them take that from you. Evelyn's eyes softened as she took in his words. Maybe you're right, she said. Maybe I have a choice now. A week later, Evelyn received a call that shook her to her core. It was from her father. She hadn't spoken to him in months, and his voice on the other end of the line was cold, authoritative, as it always had been. Evelyn, we need to talk, he said, his tone devoid of warmth. This farce you've been living is enough. You need to come back. Your place is here with the family. You're the only one who can fix this." She felt her chest tighten as the words sunk in. She had known this day would come, but hearing it out loud made it real. She glanced at John, who had been sitting nearby, his presence a comfort. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice cracking. John looked at her, his eyes filled with compassion. "You do what feels right for you, not for them. No matter what they say, it's your life now." Evelyn nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I've been waiting for their approval my whole life. Maybe it's time I stop." Evelyn spent the next few days in deep thought, torn between the expectations of her family and the freedom she was beginning to feel. The idea of going back to the life she had once known seemed suffocating, yet there was still a part of her that longed for approval, for validation from her father. One morning, as she sat in the same terminal where they first met, John sat beside her. "I can't keep running from this," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "It's like no matter how far I go, I'm still tied to them." John looked at her, his voice low but steady. "You're not running anymore, Evelyn. You're standing here making the choice. Whatever you decide, it's yours to make." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. "I never thought I'd get to this point, but I think I'm finally starting to see who I really am." The following day, Evelyn made the call. She couldn't stop the trembling in her hands as she dialed her father's number, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. "I'm not coming back," she said, her voice steady but unwavering. "I've made my choice. This life isn't for me anymore. I can't live for you or for anyone else. I need to live for myself." Her father's response was a mix of anger and disbelief, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She had made the decision, one that had taken months of doubt, struggle, and fear to reach. When the call ended, Evelyn looked at John, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "It's done," she whispered. "I did it. I chose me." John gave her a small smile, one that spoke volumes. "You've done something important," he said quietly. "And now you're free." In the days that followed, Evelyn began to embrace the life she was carving for herself. The pressure of her family's expectations slowly faded, replaced by a new sense of freedom and possibility. One afternoon, as she and John sat in the same cafe, she looked at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "I think I'm finally getting the hang of this," she said, her voice light with the joy of newfound confidence. John chuckled, his eyes soft with affection. "I never had any doubt," he replied. "You just needed to see what was always there, inside of you." Evelyn nodded, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." John smiled back, the connection between them now unmistakable. "You've done the hard part," he said. "Now you get to live it." Weeks had passed since Evelyn made the difficult choice to step away from her family's expectations, and the freedom she had been seeking was finally beginning to take shape. But the road to liberation wasn't without its challenges. One morning, as Evelyn walked through the airport terminal with John, the weight of her newfound independence was still settling in. "It's harder than I thought," she admitted, her voice tinged with both weariness and strength. "I thought once I made the decision, everything would just fall into place, but it's not that simple. There are days when I feel like I'm fighting the world." John, who had been by her side every step of the way, nodded in understanding. "It's never easy," he said quietly, "but you've come further than you think. You've already taken the hardest steps. Now, it's just about holding on to it one day at a time." Evelyn smiled faintly, her confidence wavering, but her resolve stronger than ever. "I can do this," she said. The days following their conversation were filled with both progress and setbacks. Evelyn was learning how to navigate her own life without the suffocating expectations of her past. But even as she moved forward, her family's influence still loomed large. One afternoon, she received another call, this time from her mother. "Evelyn, this has gone on long enough," her mother's voice said, sharp and demanding. "You need to come back. You're wasting your life." Evelyn felt a surge of frustration and anger. She had thought she could escape it, but the pull of their voices still tugged at her heart. "I'm not coming back," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I've made my choice. This life isn't for me anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You'll regret this, her mother finally said, her voice cold. Evelyn closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I won't, she replied firmly. I've already made peace with it. After the call, Evelyn was quiet, her mind racing. John, sensing her unease, sat beside her in silence. Are you all right? He asked softly, his eyes searching hers for an answer. Evelyn let out a long breath. It's just hard, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was strong enough to cut them out of my life, but every time they call, I feel like I'm back in that world. It's like I'm still trapped, no matter how far I go. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not trapped, Evelyn. Not anymore. You've already taken the most important step, choosing yourself. She nodded slowly, though her eyes betrayed the doubt that still lingered. I want to believe that, she said quietly. But sometimes, it doesn't feel like enough. John's hand lingered for a moment longer, before he gently pulled away. It's enough. One day at a time. That's all you need to focus on. Evelyn took some time to reflect, and with each passing day she found herself becoming more certain of her path. She no longer felt like a puppet, bound by the expectations of others. She was finally living her life, even if it meant facing the fear and doubt that had always been there. I'm starting to feel it, she said one evening as they sat at their usual spot in the cafe. It's not perfect, but it's mine. I'm starting to understand what freedom feels like. John smiled, his pride in her evident. It's a process, but you're doing it. You're living it now. Evelyn nodded, her gaze distant for a moment, as she took in the quiet buzz of the cafe. There are still days when it feels impossible, she admitted, but I can't go back. I can't let them win. John's smile softened. They already lost. You're living for yourself now. The days that followed were full of quiet victories. Evelyn had not yet fully freed herself from the ghost of her family's influence, but she was no longer bound by it. She was carving out her own future, one day at a time. You've changed, John said one evening as they walked through the airport once more. You've come so far. Evelyn smiled softly, her expression calm but filled with a quiet pride. I have, she agreed. And I know now that it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. About the choices I make along the way. She paused, looking at John, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I think I'm finally okay with that. John nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. You've made peace with yourself, he said. And that's the most important thing. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Thank you, John, she whispered. For everything. It had been months since Evelyn had made the choice to reclaim her life, and the weight of her past had slowly but surely lifted. Yet, as she stood in front of the familiar doors of her family's estate, an unexpected pang of doubt coursed through her. She had been living her life on her terms, away from the suffocating expectations, but a part of her still wondered if it was possible to completely let go of her past. I thought I could just walk away, Evelyn murmured to John, her voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. But what if I still need them? What if I can't truly leave them behind? John looked at her with steady eyes, his expression both calm and resolute. You're not walking away from them, he said softly. You're choosing yourself, and that's the only person you need to be true to now. You've already done the hardest part. Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she stared at the door. I'm not sure I can do this, she whispered. Evelyn turned to face John, her gaze searching for something in his eyes, a reassurance that she could go on. What if they don't accept me, she asked, her voice filled with vulnerability. What if they never understand that this was my choice? John gave her a small but reassuring smile. It's not about their acceptance. It's about you understanding your own worth. They may not get it now, but that's okay. You've already chosen the life you want. That's the most important thing. Evelyn stood in silence for a moment, her fingers trembling as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She had always lived for others, trying to gain their approval, but now, standing in front of her past, She knew it was time to stop seeking validation from them. She turned back to the gates, her resolve beginning to firm up. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm ready to finally walk away." The moment they stepped through the gates, it felt as if Evelyn was stepping into a new world. The estate was no longer a symbol of her past. It had become just another building, part of a history she no longer needed to carry. She walked slowly toward the grand entrance, the sound of her heels echoing in the silence. When they reached the front door, Evelyn hesitated. "This is it," she murmured, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and relief. John stood behind her, a quiet presence offering her the strength she needed. "You don't need to be afraid," he said. "You've already made the choice. This is just a formality now." Evelyn's hand reached out to grasp the door handle, and for a moment she thought about turning back. But the vision of the life she had fought for, one of freedom and self-determination, pushed her forward. "I'm not going back," she whispered, and with that she turned the handle. The door swung open, and Evelyn was met with the cold, indifferent gaze of her father. The moment felt surreal, as though she were standing in a dream. "Evelyn," her father said, his voice thick with disappointment, "this is not the way you were raised. You're making a mistake." Evelyn's heart raced, but she stood her ground, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I've made my choice, Father," she said, her eyes locking with his. "This is who I am now. This is my life to live, not yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father opened his mouth to speak again, but Evelyn cut him off. "No more. I'm done with living for your approval. I'm done with trying to fit into the life you made for me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This is where I walk away." Her father stared at her for a long moment, and then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the house. Evelyn stood there, the weight of the moment settling over her like a warm, heavy blanket. Evelyn closed the door behind her, and for the first time in her life, she felt a profound sense of peace. The heavy burden of her family's expectations had been lifted, and though there was still uncertainty ahead, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. "It's done," she said softly to John, her voice filled with relief. John smiled at her, his eyes soft with pride. "You did it," he said quietly. "You chose yourself, and that's the most important thing." Evelyn nodded, her face softening into a contented smile. "I think I finally understand what freedom feels like," she whispered, looking out at the horizon. "And it's all mine." She took John's hand in hers, the warmth of their connection grounding her as they stood together in the moment of quiet triumph.